The FBI had successfully managed to place a listening device in the very home of mob boss Charles Lucky Luciano. They were able to catch him planning a hit live, but then something happened that nobody expected. Hi everyone, welcome to this channel. Today we'll be discussing the FBI bug caught the mob planning a hit live. If you like criminal psychology content, please consider subscribing. In the early 1960s, the FBI was hot on the trail of several mafia crime bosses. These men were incredibly elusive, operating in the shadows and always seeming to be one step ahead of the feds. But the FBI was determined to bring them to justice. And they had a secret weapon, an undercover operative who had managed to infiltrate the inner circle of one of the most powerful mob bosses, the infamous Charles Lucky Luciano. Their operative was feeding them intelligence about the other mob bosses, Vito Genovese, Frank Terry, and Sam Giancana. The plan was to arrest all three men at the same time, dealing a crippling blow to the Mafia. However, it soon became clear that Lucky was onto them. It became suspicious of the operative and began to question his loyalty. The FBI knew that they had to act fast before Lucky figured out that they were being spied on. They decided to use a hidden microphone to record Lucky and his associates. This was risky, but it was their only chance to gather the evidence they needed to prosecute the mob boss. The microphone was placed in Lucky's home, and soon the FBI was able to listen in on his conversations. What they heard was shocking. Lucky and his associates were planning a major crime spree, including a series of kidnappings and murders. The FBI was now faced with a difficult decision. They could continue to monitor Lucky, or they could make an arrest and risk alerting the other mob bosses. They decided to move forward with the arrest. On October 15, 1962, Vito Genovese and Frank Terry were arrested. However, things didn't go according to plan. As soon as the news of the arrests broke, Lucky went into action. He realized that he was being spied on and that the FBI had informants in his inner circle. He ordered his men to kidnap and murder the informant, Joe Velazzi, and anyone else who might have been involved in the investigation. The FBI had not anticipated Lucky's reaction, and they were now in a race against time to protect their undercover operatives and gather the evidence. They needed to prosecute Lucky. The stakes had never been higher. If the FBI failed, not only would their investigation be compromised, but their lives could be in danger. Lucky Luciano was one of the most powerful mob bosses of all time. He had built his criminal empire on fear and violence, and he would stop at nothing to protect his power. Lucky's men began to search for the FBI informant. They questioned everyone who had come into contact with Lucky. They'd even placed ads in newspapers offering a reward for information that would lead to the informant's capture. The FBI knew that they had to act fast to protect their undercover operatives. They moved them to safe houses and increased their security. They also began to search for the missing Joe Velazzi, but he had vanished without a trace. As the investigation continued, the FBI uncovered more and more evidence of Lucky's criminal activities. They had listened to him and his associates planning crimes ranging from kidnapping and extortion to murder and racketeering. With each passing day, the case against Lucky grew stronger. But as the feds closed in, Lucky became more desperate. He knew that his time was running out, and he began to take more extreme measures to protect himself. He ordered his men to plant bombs around the city. Knowing that the police would be reluctant to search every package and phone call, he had become a ghost, always seeming to be one step ahead of the authorities. And as the net tightened around him, he knew that he would not go down without a fight. Despite the danger, the FBI was determined to bring Lucky to justice. They continued to follow every lead, no matter how dangerous it may be. Finally, on October 29, 1963, they got their break. A witness came forward and told them that he had seen Lucky in a bar in Manhattan. An undercover agent went to the bar, and sure enough, there was Lucky sitting in a booth. The agent approached him and arrested him without incident. It was a stunning victory for the FBI. They had finally caught up with one of the most elusive criminals of all time. As the news of Lucky's arrest spread, a wave of relief and triumph swept through the city. People celebrated in the streets, and the media went wild. Lucky was charged with a number of crimes including murder, extortion, and racketeering. The evidence against him was overwhelming, and he was convicted on all counts. He was sentenced to 50 years in prison, and the judge made it clear that he would never be released. For the FBI, It was the end of a long and arduous investigation. They had finally brought down one of the most powerful mob bosses of all time. But it was also just the beginning. With Lucky behind bars, the other mob bosses were now on the run. The FBI had to move quickly if they wanted to keep the momentum going. Frank Tyree was also found guilty on all counts and sentenced to 25 years in prison. Vito Genovese, however, put up a fight. He appealed his conviction, but it was overturned on a technicality. He was retried and convicted again, but this time he was able to avoid the death penalty. He was sentenced to 15 years in prison. Sam Giancana, meanwhile, was able to elude the FBI for many years. But eventually he was caught and sentenced to 10 years in prison on tax evasion charges. With the key members of the Mafia arrested and imprisoned, the FBI had dealt a devastating blow to the organization. However, they knew that the fight was not over. The Mafia would likely regroup and try to regain its power. But thanks to the FBI's efforts, the organization was severely weakened. What do you think of the events that unfolded? Just let us know in the comments below. Lucky Luciano was one of the most notorious mob bosses of all time. He had built his criminal empire on fear and violence, and he was known for his cunning and ruthlessness. When the FBI placed a bug in his home, they thought they had him surrounded. But Lucky was always one step ahead of them. He ordered his men to kidnap and murder anyone who might have been involved in the investigation. And he even managed to elude the authorities for several years before he was finally caught. If you enjoyed this video, watch another one about serial killer Jeffrey Dahmer. See you next time.